The old trolley barn smelled of rust, floodwater, and forgotten history. Rain dripped through holes in the massive timber roof. Several inches of muddy water still covered the cracked concrete floor. Broken trolley tracks disappeared beneath decades of silt. The enormous brick building had been abandoned for nearly 50 years. Everyone agreed it should be demolished. Harold and Margaret Turner disagreed. At 70 years old, they had nowhere else to go. The county auction lasted less than 10 minutes. Opening bid, $10. Silence. The auctioneer looked around. No interest. People shook their heads. One contractor laughed. "You couldn't pay me to haul away that mess." Harold quietly raised his hand. $10. The auctioneer blinked. Sold. The crowd chuckled as the elderly couple signed the paperwork. One man whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Imagine spending your last $10 on a flooded warehouse." Harold simply smiled. He had heard worse. 6 months earlier, he and Margaret lived comfortably in a modest retirement home. Harold repaired clocks as a hobby. Margaret taught piano lessons to neighborhood children. Life wasn't extravagant, but it was peaceful. Then disaster arrived. A wildfire destroyed the manufacturing company that still paid Harold a small retirement pension. The company entered bankruptcy. Benefits disappeared. Medical expenses quickly consumed their savings after Margaret needed emergency surgery. They sold their house, then their car. Eventually, even their apartment became impossible to afford. Everything they still owned fit inside an aging cargo van. Several suitcases, 2 folding chairs, Harold's toolbox, and his late father's leather document case. Harold never opened it. His father had simply said, "One day you'll know." The couple spent weeks sleeping inside the van. One rainy afternoon, while reading public auction notices at the local library, Margaret pointed toward a tiny listing. Historic municipal trolley barn. Flood damaged. Minimum bid, $10. Nobody wanted flood-damaged industrial buildings. Harold looked thoughtfully at the accompanying photograph. Something caught his attention. The windows. Margaret smiled. "You noticed too?" The original arched windows remained intact. Buildings from that era often featured remarkable craftsmanship. Harold quietly nodded. Someone cared when they built this place. 3 days later, it belonged to them. The first evening inside proved difficult. They parked the van beneath the tallest section of the roof. Rain echoed endlessly through broken skylights. Still, Margaret smiled. "It's dry enough." Harold laughed. "That's progress." Each morning they cleaned, pumped out floodwater, removed debris, sorted salvageable lumber. Neighbors occasionally stopped by. Most assumed the couple would eventually abandon the project. Instead, the opposite happened. A retired electrician donated old lighting fixtures. A plumber helped repair drainage. Teenagers from a nearby trade school volunteered on weekends. Slowly, the giant trolley barn came alive again. One afternoon, Harold began removing damaged brick near an old office overlooking the trolley floor. He paused. "This wall sounds wrong." Margaret walked over. He knocked again. Most bricks sounded solid. One section echoed. "Hollow." Curious, Harold measured the office. The interior dimensions fell nearly 6 feet short of the exterior wall. There has to be another room. They searched carefully. Nothing. No door. No loose bricks. No hidden handles. Hours passed. Finally, Harold sat beside his father's old leather document case. For the first time in decades. He opened it. Inside rested only 3 items. An antique brass trolley token, a folded blueprint, and a handwritten letter. His father's familiar handwriting instantly brought tears to his eyes. "Son, if life ever leaves you with nowhere to go, go where people stopped looking." Harold unfolded the blueprint. It showed the exact trolley barn. One office wall carried a small handwritten circle. Beside it appeared 2 words. Track 9. Margaret examined the drawing. "There isn't a track 9. There used to be." The old blueprint showed an additional maintenance track removed during renovations many years earlier. Harold walked back to the hollow wall. Near the floor, he noticed one unusually dark brick. Its center featured a tiny circular indentation, exactly the size of the brass trolley token. His hands trembled. He inserted the token. A quiet metallic click echoed deep inside the wall. Ancient gears slowly engaged. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The entire brick section silently rolled sideways. Behind it stretched a beautifully preserved room untouched by time. Mahogany filing cabinets, engineering tables, leather-bound ledgers. Historic transit maps. Everything remained perfectly dry. At the center stood a magnificent oak desk. One envelope rested neatly on top. Across the front appeared 6 handwritten words. Only open when hope seems lost. Harold carefully picked up the envelope. His fingers shook. Because suddenly the flooded trolley barn everyone laughed at wasn't simply another abandoned building anymore. It had become the final destination of a secret his father somehow knew existed decades before. And whatever waited inside that envelope was important enough to remain hidden until the moment Harold and Margaret had absolutely nothing left except each other, and the courage to begin again. Harold carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested a handwritten letter. Beneath it lay several leather-bound journals, an iron keyring, a bundle of rolled engineering drawings, and a small brass box. Margaret stood beside him. Neither spoke. Harold unfolded the letter. "My dear friend, if you've opened this room, then you believe this old trolley barn deserved another chance." He frowned. The letter wasn't signed by his father. Instead, the signature read, "Edwin Mercer, Chief Engineer, Municipal Transit Authority." The letter continued, "Buildings only become abandoned when people stop believing they still have a purpose." Harold smiled. Those words sounded exactly like something his father would have admired. They began opening the filing cabinets. Inside were thousands of engineering drawings, original trolley designs, historic bridge plans, electrical systems, restoration methods. Every blueprint documented remarkable craftsmanship from an era when buildings were designed to last generations. Margaret carefully opened another cabinet. It contained photographs, hundreds of them, workers building trolley lines, mechanics repairing streetcars, apprentices learning skilled trades, entire families standing proudly beside finished projects. Then Harold noticed something unusual. Every photo included handwritten notes, names, addresses, businesses started later by former apprentices. Curious, he opened one leather journal. It wasn't a diary. It was a mentorship record. Edwin Mercer quietly trained unemployed young workers after hours inside the trolley barn. When they became successful craftsmen, they voluntarily contributed tiny ownership shares in their growing businesses back to a trust Edwin created. Cabinet shops, machine companies, electrical contractors, historic restoration firms, foundries, stone masons, each donated only a small percentage. But the investments continued growing decade after decade. Margaret whispered, "He invested in people." Harold nodded. "Exactly." Another cabinet held patent certificates, rail maintenance equipment, workshop inventions, electrical safety devices, specialized restoration tools. Many remained licensed to manufacturers. The royalties were still active. Then Harold noticed another steel door hidden behind an enormous matte cabinet. Its brass plaque simply read, "The Depot." The iron keyring fit perfectly. The heavy door slowly opened. Both stood speechless. An enormous underground workshop stretched beneath the trolley barn. Historic machine tools stood beside modern fabrication equipment. Woodworking benches, metalworking stations, electrical laboratories, architectural drafting rooms. Every corner looked perfectly maintained. Large skylights hidden beneath street-level glass blocks flooded the space with warm natural light. At the center stood an elegant oak conference table. A vintage projector waited beside it. One film canister carried a handwritten label. "Final stop." Harold inserted it. The projector hummed softly. An elderly Edwin Mercer appeared. Gray-haired, calm, still wearing an engineer's work coat. "Welcome." His voice echoed warmly through the workshop. "If you're watching this." Then someone finally reopened the trolley barn. He smiled. "I hoped that person would arrive." He slowly walked between the workstations. When people looked at this building, they saw old bricks. I saw a place where ordinary people became extraordinary craftsmen. Historic photographs filled the screen. Young mechanics, electricians, carpenters, welders, immigrants learning new trades, veterans beginning second careers. Entire generations finding opportunity inside the old depot. Edwin gently rested his hand on an antique trolley control lever. "I never believed wealth should sit inside vaults. It should move. Like a trolley, carrying people toward better futures." Harold quietly wiped away a tear. Edwin continued, "If these investments make your life comfortable, wonderful. But comfort alone isn't enough." He looked directly into the camera. "Open these doors again. Teach, build, share, Because communities are restored exactly the same way buildings are. One careful repair at a time. The projectors slowly faded to black. Silence filled the enormous workshop. Margaret squeezed Harold's hand. "He reminds me of your father." Harold smiled. "I think that's why Dad left me here." The following months transformed everything. Attorneys verified every document, every trust agreement, every partnership, every patent. Everything proved legitimate. The ownership shares had quietly grown into holdings worth many millions. The royalty income alone provided lifelong financial security. News spread rapidly. Developers immediately offered to purchase the Trolley barn. Several companies wanted the land. Harold politely declined every offer. Instead, he and Margaret created the Mercer Transit Heritage Foundation. The underground workshop reopened exactly as Edwin intended. Retired electricians taught apprentices. Master carpenters restored historic buildings. Metalworkers trained young veterans. Engineers mentored high school students. Former graduates returned as instructors. The giant Trolley barn, once scheduled for demolition, became the region's busiest vocational restoration center. The flooded main hall transformed into an exhibition space celebrating transportation history. One restored streetcar stood proudly on rebuilt tracks running through the center of the building. Visitors arrived from across the country. Schoolchildren explored the museum. Young entrepreneurs developed restoration businesses inside the workshop. The old building no longer represented the past. It built the future. 10 years later, Harold and Margaret walked slowly through the beautifully restored Trolley barn. The once flooded floor now gleamed beneath polished rails. Laughter echoed where silence once lived. A documentary crew followed them. The interviewer smiled. "So, is it true you bought this place for $10? Harold chuckled. "Best $10 I ever spent." "And behind that hidden wall, you found millions?" Harold looked toward the underground workshop where dozens of apprentices worked beside experienced mentors. He smiled. "In a way, what was really hidden?" The interviewer expected gold, old currency, rare artifacts. Instead, Harold answered quietly, "A second chance." The interviewer looked surprised. "For you?" Harold slowly shook his head. "For everyone who walks through those doors." Margaret added softly, "We lost our house, but we found our purpose." The interviewer lowered her microphone. "I've interviewed many wealthy people. I've never heard anyone describe wealth like that." Harold reached into his pocket. He still carried his father's old brass trolley token. The token opened the wall. He smiled toward the busy workshop. But kindness opened everything else. Outside, the restored Trolley barn stood proudly against the evening sky. Families gathered on the old platform. Children climbed aboard the beautifully restored streetcar. Students carried handcrafted projects toward waiting trucks. The building that everyone once called worthless had become the heart of an entire community. Because behind that hidden brick wall wasn't simply a fortune worth millions. It was 70 years of patient mentorship, generosity, craftsmanship, and one remarkable belief: that no person and no building is ever truly beyond saving if someone is willing to see the future hidden beneath the damage.